So it was only a year ago, the fastest that we could take an API from design through to production would take us 6 to 8 weeks. Development was centralized. We had 500 APIs deployed on a single gateway, and the config was monolithic. So for that reason, we would only release monthly. It's also a heavily regulated environment, lots of checks and balances and signing off in place. So while we had a really mature process, there's no getting away from the fact that it was a bottleneck. So around the same time, NAB's technology leadership set the strategy around APIs and microservices. And it was all about speed, discoverability, and reuse. And they also wanted to change the mindset around you build it, you run it. And they wanted service teams to have that autonomy. So that means that our team had to change what we were doing around APIs to align with that. So by the end of this presentation, you'll have a pretty good idea of how the API platform team responsibly delivered self-service API management to the enterprise. And I highlight responsibly because you've got to keep in mind that we've got over 100 service teams looking to deploy their services who used to rely on us. And they're sort of effectively being sort of thrown out and on their own. So we needed a way to ensure that we put the guardrails in place to both protect themselves and the bank. We really wanted our teams to focus on value, the time to value, and the value that they provide was providing their services. So we didn't want them spending too much time worrying about the running and the managing of the gateway itself. So we wanted to provide a real SaaS-like experience. So when I say SaaS-like, I'm talking about not having to worry about the infrastructure or the app of Kong itself, making sure it scales for their needs. We abstract all the upgrades. It happens all behind the scenes. So whenever we add new features or upgrade Kong, they don't have to worry about it. And of course, we need to implement automated governance. This is also a big change for the API platform team as well, because traditionally, we were pretty project-driven, like when projects come in and want to deliver something, we pretty much deliver what they ask. In this new world, we're taking that real product and services mindset. We need to be subject matter experts, and we need to be, I suppose, quite opinionated of what's required. We need to sort of talk to our customers and understand their needs. And we also need to stand our ground on best practice. And the interesting thing is it kind of turns the tables a bit. Now it's our job to really prioritize based on features that will benefit the most of our tenants, as opposed to maybe necessarily the noisiest one. So, and of course, we need to provide all the tooling so that they can do their job and operate their APIs autonomously. We actually spent many months looking around for off-the-shelf solutions. And we really didn't want to have to build it, but in the end, after a long search, it ended up that we just had to build it ourselves. So the solution comprises about 6 components. The ones on the left are managed by the API platforms team. So we ended up building a developer portal, which we call Stargaze. We've got the Kong API runtime itself, which we've built a whole number of CI/CD pipelines around it. And then we've also built a CLI tool, which we call Swagster, and this is how our tenants deploy change. I'll go into a bit more detail in it a little bit. But of course, we've also got some services provided by existing NAB teams. We've got the identity provider, enterprise logging, and security and access management for employees. I'm going to go through about 3 different use cases: onboarding, publishing, and consumption. And between those 3 use cases, we've got 2 actors. We've got the service publishers and the service consumers. So in this case, you can be either a consumer or a publisher. You need to approach the API platform team and get onboarded with us. Onboarding is not a very exciting topic, but it's actually a really, really important one, because for us, it's all about how quickly can our service teams jump on and start publishing APIs. And we need to make sure that they can be operationally ready. So in this case, we assign them a unique namespace. And once we have that namespace, we as the API platform team actually onboard them. We liaise with the other NAB teams, and we actually onboard them onto the identity provider. We create an enterprise logging account so that logs get shipped straight away. And in that enterprise logging account, we actually use Splunk. We actually pre-create a whole number of dashboards so that pretty much they're kind of ready to see how their APIs are being used, any throttle hits, what sort of transactions per second they're getting. They just hit the ground running. They, of course, get onboarded to the developer portal. And we also create probably about 8 or 9 AD groups, which can be managed in our enterprise access management portal. And these AD groups give varying levels of access, such as being able to see the logs, being able to publish APIs, or being able to create clients and consume APIs. Now, if you're a service publisher, you'll sort of go up to the top, and then we'll actually create some tenancy infrastructure. So the concept of a tenancy for us is really just the underlying infrastructure. So we actually create a ECS cluster. We stand up a Redis instance as well as a Postgres instance. We use all managed services in AWS just because we don't want to manage anything we don't really have to. Once that's in place, then we actually start creating the Kong environments. Generally for production, you'd only have one, but for non-prod, our teams ask for anywhere from 2 to 10, depending on their development needs. Now, if you happen to only want to consume APIs, we kind of just skip the tenancy infrastructure part, and then we hand over the tenancy. When we hand over, we give a really detailed onboarding email about all the things they have to do to start using it, such as applying for the AD groups and so on. We're trying to make this as easy as possible. So once they've been onboarded, as a publisher, you're pretty much ready to go to start publishing. They just need to get access, so they go into the access portal, apply for that, and then the approver of those groups will approve, and access will be granted automatically. We then expect them to author some Swagger, and then with that Swagger, they'll actually use our CLI tool and push that Swagger to the Kong gateway. And the cool thing about this is that once you've got, when you do push to the platform, it's deploying the APIs to the gateway and publishing to the dev portal in one go. And then at that point, a consumer is ready to come in. I'm going to go into this a little bit more detail for you. So with the Swagger, we accept OpenAPI Spec 203. It's pretty standard Swagger. But we do create a number of custom attributes, so XSwag star. And what this does is it actually lets our publishers configure Kong plugins. So in this case, it's the OpenID Connect plugin, and there's only 2 parameters that you need to set. We've actually pre-configured the majority of the settings for them and only exposed the settings that they'll ever need to change in the course of normal business. So it's pretty straightforward. And then along with the Swagger, we also have the concept of a service file. And the service file is all about configuring all the back-end services for different environments. So as you can see here, we've got the sys-test and the perf environment set. And we also allow variable interpolation so that you can sort of configure any changes. So the whole idea of this service file is so that with the Swagger remains static and doesn't change as you deploy your API into different environments. And you put all those changes here in the service file. So as a publisher, you've created your Swagger and service file. You've then put it into what we call a service folder. And then you get onto the CLI tool. So it's a Node.js-based command line tool. And it's quite clever because it actually interrogates what's on the Kong runtime, checks the Swagger, and it only deploys the difference. And this is really important because it means that, in theory, you only need to test what has changed. I mentioned before, deploys to the gateway and publishes to the dev portal simultaneously. And this is an important one. It's the only way our tenants can interact with the gateway. So it's really a control point for us. And we do that because we can do 2 things now. We can abstract the gateway technology. So we may have more gateways in the future, and we could then provide exactly the same experience to our tenants. They can still use the Swagger and CLI tool to deploy to any gateway. And then the other reason is that we can now start to govern or enforce some API standards. And we've chosen a CLI tool because it's just really easy to then use in a CI/CD pipeline. So a bit of an introduction to Swagster. So there's about 5 commands. We've got apply, which is what you'd use to deploy a service folder to the platform. List will show you what is running in the runtime at that point in time. You can validate your Swagger, or you can remove a service. And the last command, purge, is just if you want to completely wipe the gateway, and it's sort of helpful in a test or dev environment. So I'll just show you a quick example. So in this case, we're going to apply one of the folders. So you've got apply and then Kong, and Kong is actually the platform. And I mentioned before we may have more platforms in the future, so you just switch that out to your alternate platform. You point to then your service folder, and then you point to Kong's admin API. And then the last one, dev, is actually the environment that I was talking about in the service file. So if you've got perf, sys-test, and so on, you would change it, and those are the parameters it would use. And I've just got very, very verbose there. So we run it. What it just does a check between the two, and then at the end in blue, we can actually see what's been deployed. So in this case, we've got the example service. We've got rate limiting advanced applied across the entire service, and we've got two routes, and one of the routes has rate limiting advanced and a request size limiting there. So they've been pushed out, and if you log into the Kong's management portal, you can see those two routes have been deployed. This is an important note that we actually only provide read-only access to the Kong admin portal for the reason that we want Swagstar to be the only way that you can deploy. And then what we do is we publish our API standards, and this is just a small example of some of them. So we have sort of mandatory root fields, base path has to be in a particular format, and what we can then do is start to program all of this stuff into Swagstar so that if they're not aligning to it, they'll either get a warning or we'll actually stop them from publishing altogether. So at this point, our publishers have authored their Swagger, they've published, it's gone to the gateway and to the dev portal. So this is our dev portal, Stargaze. It's been done in React, and we've got a Node.js backend for it. It's a landing page. So at the bottom, we just sort of track how many teams have been onboarded, number of production APIs that have been pushed out. If I drill in, so what we have here is just an example of one of our published APIs. On the left-hand side, we've got all our high-level API categories, and this one's the client's API. We've got the rendered Swagger here, and we've also got a drop-down at the top right, and this is to change tenant context. We actually have to have separate AWS environments for prod and non-prod, and for that reason, we have to create separate tenancies. And you can actually switch between them, and switching between them will give you a view of the different clients and different APIs that you have published in those different contexts. You can also be a member of more than one team. So I'm a member of the API Gateways team, but if you're a member of more teams, you'll have more options in your drop-down, so you can switch between them. And as a consumer, as you're browsing through APIs, you can actually see, you can actually switch environments as well. So you can actually see the different APIs in different environments, which is really handy because you may have different versions of your APIs in different environments. As a publisher, we've also got a bit more of an admin view where you get just a list of all your API pods and the methods associated with them. You can also drill in there and see some of the scope information in there as well. So that wraps up the publishing aspect of it. And then now we come to consuming. So as a service consumer, like a publisher, you still need to apply for access. You need the permissions to be able to create a client. And when you create a client, you can then add scopes. Immediately, through self-service, you'll receive the client ID and secret to authenticate against the IDP. And in parallel, we'll send an email to whoever owns those scopes that you applied for. And then once they approve, then those scopes will get added immediately. So I'll just run through that in a bit of detail. So we're back in Stargaze, we're back in the dev portal, and we switch to the clients tab. So down here, you can see a list of all the existing clients that this person has, or this team has, I should say. And you can also switch between environments to see the different clients in different environments. Now, if we click on the Create Client button to the right there, brings us to this screen, and you can choose your client type. So right now, we support service, single-page app, native, and web. So we'll click Service, just fill in a few mandatory fields, mainly around the client name and the scopes. And then when you're done with that, you're presented with your client credentials, and you can take those and hit the IDP. And then in the background, an email's gone out to whoever owns the scopes, and they can actually then see who's requested the scopes, what scopes have been requested, as well as who else can potentially approve this, and it's up to them to approve or deny. But as they approve it, those scopes are added to the client immediately. So that pretty much wraps up the three main use cases, and you can see that all of it is very simple, straightforward, and all self-service. I just wanted to share some learnings with you about this journey that we've taken. This is an interesting one. Self-serve autonomy does have its own challenges. It's not a silver bullet. And we found that when we onboarded people, they needed a lot of help. While we built it, it's obvious how it works to us. It's not obvious to another team. We started off doing a lot of one-on-one training with our teams. We actually had a lot of teams. I think in the first 2 months, we had 30 teams approach us and try to come on board. And we were actually doing 1 hour face-to-face sessions with each one of them. It just took a lot of our time, especially when we were trying to build this new platform quickly. Our first approach was to actually just write a lot of documentation. And interestingly, even though we had a lot of detailed documentation, the first amount of feedback we got was, there's too much documentation, there's too much to read. So we actually then moved to videos. And for us, that was actually the sweet spot. What we did, we actually recorded some of our training sessions, put some videos together, just talked about the really important points on how to use it all. And then we backed that up with the documentation. And at that point, we didn't have to do one-on-one training sessions anymore, and everyone was literally able to start using this on their own. It's really important to have a shared responsibility model. We've changed from being a centralized team where people walk up and have to ask us to do things to pretty much providing a SaaS service. So that responsibilities change. So in the past, we were fully responsible for any API deployed on our centralized gateway, but now we're providing an API platform. So as long as the gateway is performant and functioning, we're sort of doing our bit as the API platform team. So our tenants now have to be in the mindset is well, I'm responsible for the API itself. I need to monitor it, and I need to put alerting on it, and I need to be checking logs and making sure throttles are not hit and capacity managing it. That just has to be well documented so that you're managing their expectations when they come on board and they're doing their bit before they go live. And then the last one is you've got to be really clear on your value proposition. I still get the occasional individual or a couple of teams that come up and go, Dennis, this is still too complicated. Why can't I just go onto AWS and stand up an API gateway instance? It's true, you could. It'd be really quick and you get your API exposed, but we're talking about more than that. We're talking about discoverability and reuse. So I put together a bit of a slide around the value proposition that we provide around this. So we do provide that API discoverability and consumption ecosystem. It's really quick to discover and reuse. And that's through the dev portal. And we've also integrated through the IDP. We've done all that sort of plumbing so that the IDP is connected to Kong out of the box. We've implemented the governance and API standards through what we call Swagstar. And then we've also met all our security and regulatory obligations. We actually have to certify platforms for confidential data and so on. We have to do penetration testing. We have to have disaster recovery plans, continuity plans, and we have to ensure logging's in place. Then you have the whole suite of testing that we have to do. And then you have the fact that we provide this as a SaaS. So we provide monitoring of the platform itself. And we release new features, new plugins. We update Kong for you every month. And we also provide a certification of performance. So rather than asking us every time, hey, I've got 10 TPS or I've got 100 TPS, is it going to work? We just put it on the intranet and say, we can do X number of TPS. If you're underneath that, you're good. So if you put that in perspective compared to I'm going to stand up my own gateway and do this versus all of that, the value proposition is very, very clear. And we haven't had anyone go out on their own since they've seen this. So that brings us to today. So where we were a year ago was 6 to 8 weeks. And now we're actually able to onboard our teams in under 2 days. And once they're onboarded, they can be up and running in well under a day. So we're talking about 3 days now. And the reality is once you're onboarded, you can really deploy as often as you like, every minute if you wanted to. It's really limited to how quickly they can stand up a stub or a microservice themselves. They're only limited by their own processes. We've also completely changed the responsibility model, and now we've basically given autonomy to our service teams to operate as quickly or slowly as they want. So before I wrap up, I just want to call out the amazing work that our team in Melbourne have done. They've been absolutely smashed for the last year trying to get this out. So in the first 3 months, we actually developed a minimal viable product. In about 6 months, we managed to get the majority of our core features built. In the last 6 months, they've just been uplifting and refining the platform and providing more plugins for the gateway. But the work doesn't stop. So our focus now, we're actually looking to build the same capability on Azure, and we're now putting more focus on the design aspect of APIs. Thanks a lot for your time.